She was 6 years old, sitting alone in a blizzard at 11 o'clock at night, and she didn't cry once. That was the thing Cole Ryder couldn't get out of his head. Not the cold, not the fact that no car had stopped in the hour she must have been sitting there. Not even the worn cloth doll clutched against her chest like it was the last warm thing left in the world. It was the silence. The absolute terrible silence of a child who had already learned that crying doesn't bring anyone. He almost missed her entirely. That's what haunts him now. The version of the night where he rode past without looking, where the blizzard swallowed her whole and he never knew her name. But fate has a way of forcing the wrong men to do the right things. And Cole Ryder had run out of road a long time ago. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a broken man decides he still has something worth fighting for, stay until the end of this story. You will not walk away the same. And hey, if this hits you somewhere deep, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. I want to know who's out there in the dark with me. Let's begin. The storm had been building since noon. Cole felt it first in his left shoulder. The old break that never healed clean, the one that seized up when the barometric pressure dropped fast. He'd been riding since 7 that morning, pushing the Softail hard through the kind of gray December sky that had no bottom to it, no ceiling, just this infinite flat nothing pressing down from every direction. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had fallen 11 degrees in 2 hours. By 6 o'clock, the snow was coming sideways. By 9, he should have stopped. By 10:30, he was still riding, because stopping meant sitting still, and sitting still meant thinking. And Cole Ryder had spent the better part of 4 years trying to outrun the things that lived inside his own head when he sat still too long. The highway through Garrett County in mid-December was not a road so much as a suggestion. 2 lanes of broken asphalt cutting through hill country so empty that you could drive 40 miles without seeing a building that still had its roof. Cole knew this stretch. He'd ridden it 100 times in the years since he'd come out here to disappear, back when the mountain seemed like the safest possible distance from everything he'd lost. The county had 3 towns in it, if you were generous enough to call them towns, and in between there was nothing but pine forest and frozen creek beds, and the occasional farmhouse sitting dark and silent at the end of a long gravel drive. He picked up Route 9 just past the county line, leaning into the wind, the Softail's engine cutting through the howl of it with that deep, familiar throb that was the closest thing Cole had to a constant in his life. Snow was accumulating on the road now, maybe 3 inches, and the yellow center line had disappeared completely. His headlight carved a cone of white noise out of the darkness ahead. His jaw ached from clenching. His fingers inside the heavy gloves had gone past cold into that particular numbness that feels like your hands belong to someone else. The diner appeared out of the blizzard like a bruise on the landscape. Low, yellow, a sign that read Margini stuttering on and off in the wind. One of the letters dark. He hadn't been planning to stop. The Softail had another 40 miles in it before she'd need anything, and Cole's body could take punishment longer than most people twice his size. But the left shoulder was screaming now, and the road was getting worse, and some back-brain instinct that had kept him alive through worse situations than a snowstorm made the decision before his conscious mind did. He downshifted. He pulled off the highway. He swung into the gravel lot in front of Margine's and cut the engine. The silence after the engine stopped was immense. That was when he heard it. Or rather, that was when he heard nothing, and the nothing was wrong. He stood beside the bike, pulling off his helmet, and the wind hit him full in the face, and underneath the wind, underneath the creak of the diner's sign and the soft accumulation of snow on gravel, there was a small sound. Barely a sound at all. More like the absence of movement, like something alive trying very hard not to be noticed. Cole turned. She was sitting on the concrete step that ran along the side of the diner, maybe 20 feet from where he'd parked. She'd wedged herself into the narrow space between the wall and a rusted propane tank, which would have given her about 6 inches of windbreak. Not much, but something. She was wearing a winter coat, thin, pale blue, the kind that's more aesthetic than functional, and rubber boots with cartoon animals on them that were completely wrong for this temperature. On her lap she held a cloth doll, white and worn, its button eyes staring forward with the same fixed blankness as the child's own eyes. She was looking at him. She hadn't made a sound. She hadn't flinched. She was just watching him with an expression that was the most terrifying thing Cole had seen in years, because he recognized it. It was the expression of a person who has already calculated whether to run, has already decided that running probably won't work, and has settled into a stillness that is not calm, but something else entirely. Something that has learned to look like calm because calm is safer than fear. He'd seen it on veterans. He'd seen it on people coming out of jail after long stretches. He'd seen it in the mirror once, a few months after his daughter was buried. He had never seen it on a child. "Hey," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended, worn down by hours of wind. He kept his hands visible. He didn't move closer. "You okay?" She studied him for a long moment. Snow was landing in her hair that had probably been neatly done sometime in the last day or two, but was now half undone. Dark strands plastered to the side of her face. Her cheeks were red. Not the red of cold alone, but the deeper red of wind exposure, of real cold, the kind that starts getting dangerous when it goes on too long. "Is it safe in there?" she asked. 3 words, 4 words, however you counted it. Her voice was small and perfectly level, and she wasn't asking about the weather or whether the diner was open or whether they had hot chocolate. She was asking about the people. She was asking the specific, precise question of someone who has learned that a building is not the same as safety, that adults are not automatically trustworthy, that you have to ask before you cross a threshold, because sometimes crossing a threshold is worse than staying in the cold. Cole felt something happen in his chest that he couldn't name and didn't try to. "I'll check," he said. "You stay right there." He pushed through the diner door. The bell above it made a weak jingle. Inside, Margine smelled like old coffee and grease, and the particular warmth of a place that's been heated too long by a system that's barely adequate, slightly close, slightly stale, but genuinely warm. There were 4 booths along the window, a counter with 8 stools, a pass-through window to the kitchen. 3 of the overhead fluorescents were working. One was doing that slow, rhythmic flicker that would drive you insane in 20 minutes. A woman behind the counter, late 50s, hair dyed a shade of red that had probably been bright once, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, looked up from a crossword puzzle. 2 men at the counter, both local-looking, both in their 60s, caps on, coffee cups in hand. A younger couple in the far booth sharing a plate of pie, not talking to each other. No one that Cole's instincts flagged. "Kitchen still open?" he asked the woman. "For another hour," she said. She was looking at his leather jacket, at the patches, at the general fact of him, with the expression that people who run roadside diners learn to maintain, watchful but professionally neutral. Cole had a face that people noticed and then immediately tried to look away from. The scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his jaw had that effect. So did the eyes. Some people said he looked like someone who had survived something that should have killed him. Cole had never found a way to disagree. "Got a kid outside," he said, "sitting in the snow." The woman's professional neutrality cracked. "What?" "6 years old, maybe. Alone." He held the door open. "She's been out there a while." He went back out before she could answer. The girl was exactly where he'd left her. He crouched down a few feet away, which put him at something closer to her eye level, and he kept his body language as open and unthreatening as a man with his build and his face could manage, which was a limited range of options, but he worked with what he had. "It's okay in there, sus," he said. "There's a woman at the counter. Nice enough. They've got coffee, and I'm guessing hot chocolate if you want it. It's warm." The girl looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at the diner door. Then she looked at him again. "Are you staying?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm staying." She thought about this. Then she stood up, tucking the cloth doll under her arm, and walked to the diner door and waited for him to open it. She didn't reach for his hand. She didn't say thank you. She walked inside with the careful, deliberate posture of someone navigating an unfamiliar space, and she chose the booth farthest from the door and the farthest from the other customers, and she sat down facing the room. Cole sat across from her. The woman from behind the counter, she said her name was Patty, not Margine. Margine had been her mother, was at their table in under a minute with a mug of hot chocolate and a look on her face that mixed genuine concern with the deep discomfort of someone who does not know what to do with a situation this far outside her normal experience. "Honey, where's your mama?" Patty asked, gentle, setting the hot chocolate in front of the girl. The girl wrapped both hands around the mug and did not answer. She doesn't have to answer that right now, Cole said. Patty looked at him. Something passed between them. She made a judgment call, the way people who have seen enough life learn to do. She nodded. I'll get you a coffee, she said to Cole, and went back to the counter. Cole studied the girl over the table. Up close, in the light, he could see things he hadn't been able to see in the dark. The coat was at least one size too big for her, a hand-me-down. The boots were clean, but the soles were wearing unevenly. Her fingernails had dirt under them. There was a fading mark above her left wrist that could have been anything, and that Cole's gut immediately, quietly, began cataloging as probably not nothing. What's your name? He asked. She considered the question. Emma. I'm Cole. She looked at him steadily. You have a scar. I do. Does it hurt? Not anymore. She seemed to accept this. She lifted the hot chocolate and drank, both hands still wrapped around the mug, watching him over the rim with those eyes that were too old for her face and too steady for a child sitting in a diner in a blizzard in December who should by every reasonable measure be terrified or in tears or both. Cole had been writing for 23 years. He'd covered 47 states, multiple tours abroad when he was younger, and still believed in certain things. 6 years of a life with a woman named Diane and a daughter named Rosie, who had their mother's laugh. And then 4 years of the kind of silence that comes after everything that mattered to you disappears in a single moment on a Tuesday afternoon in October. He had seen plenty of things in his life. He had felt the specific weight of loss that bends a man sideways and the specific weight of guilt that keeps him from ever fully standing up straight again. He had not, until this moment, sat across from a 6-year-old girl who reminded him of what it felt like to be truly, completely alone in the world, and felt the vertigo of it land in his sternum like something physical. Is there someone I should call? He asked. Emma's hands tightened slightly on the mug. No. Family? No. You sure? Yes. Cole drank his coffee when Patty brought it. He didn't push. He'd learned a long time ago that pushing didn't get you anywhere with people who'd already made their walls. You sat beside the wall and you waited, and sometimes the person opened a door and sometimes they didn't. Patty came back twice in the next 20 minutes, refilling things, hovering with the anxious energy of someone who desperately wanted to help and didn't know how. On her second pass, she leaned down to Cole and said quietly, "Should I call someone?" Cole looked at Emma. Emma was looking at the window, at the snow pressing against the glass, with an expression he couldn't read. "Give it a minute," Cole said. What he meant, though he didn't say it, was, "Give me a minute to figure out what we're actually dealing with before we hand her to anyone." Because he was already beginning to feel, in the specific way that comes from having watched enough bad situations develop from the outside, that there was something wrong with this picture that went beyond a lost child and a cold night. Children don't sit alone in blizzards at 11 o'clock without shoes appropriate for the weather unless the place they left was worse than the blizzard. Children don't ask if it's safe inside as their first question unless they've been given reasons to ask that question. The couple in the far booth left. The 2 men at the counter settled their bill and went. The diner was down to Cole, Emma, and Patty. That was when Emma said, without any preamble, without looking away from the window, "I walked from the highway." Cole said nothing. Let her talk. The other one, Route 6, with the farms. Her voice was still level, still precise, like she was giving a report. "I walked a long way." Route 6 was 12 miles south of where they were sitting, through pine forest, in a blizzard. "How long were you walking?" Cole asked. Emma thought about it. "Since before it got dark." Cole set down his coffee cup. That was a minimum of 6 hours. A 6-year-old child alone in a blizzard for 6 hours, 12 miles of frozen back road. The coat that wasn't warm enough, the boots that weren't right, the dirt under her fingernails, the mark above her left wrist. "Emma," he said, keeping his voice very level, "where did you come from?" She looked at him then, direct, assessing, the same look she'd given him in the parking lot when she'd been deciding whether to bolt. "A house," she said, "where kids live." Cole absorbed this. "Did someone hurt you?" he asked. Her face shifted in a way that was almost not a shift at all, just the smallest tension in the muscles around her eyes, the faintest tightening. And then she looked back at the window. "I don't want to go back," she said. That was all. That was the whole sentence. She didn't elaborate. She didn't cry. She just stated it the way you state a fact about weather or geography, something that simply is and cannot be negotiated with. Cole sat with it for a moment. Then he made a decision. It wasn't a complicated decision. It wasn't one he could have fully explained if pressed. It was the kind of decision that comes from a place below language, from whatever part of a person stays intact even after the rest of them has been largely dismantled. He looked at this child, this small, composed, terrifyingly calm child who had walked 12 miles alone in a December blizzard rather than spend another night in a house full of adults. And the decision made itself. He was not going to let her go back. He didn't know yet what that meant, practically. He didn't know what the right next step was or what the morning was going to look like. But the decision was made, and it settled into him with the clean, quiet weight of something that can't be undone. "Okay," he said. Emma looked at him. "You don't have to go back tonight," he said. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he started to wonder what she was calculating. Then she reached across the table and picked up the cloth doll she'd set down when she took the hot chocolate, and she held it against her chest, and she said, very quietly, "Okay." Patty, who had been pretending to do something behind the counter, walked over. Cole looked up at her. "Is there a motel nearby?" he asked. He already knew the answer. There wasn't, not for 25 miles. But he was buying time, arranging the chess pieces in his head. "Nothing till Heller," Patty said. She was watching Emma with a look that was protective and worried in equal measure. "You family?" "No," Cole said. "Then I have to I know," Cole said. He met her eyes. "Just give me until morning. I need to make some calls. I know people who can help, and I'd rather do this right than fast." It was not the whole truth, but it was not entirely a lie either. He did know people. Whether they were the right people for this particular situation was a question he was going to have to answer in the next few hours. Patty looked at him, at Emma, at him again, and made another of those pragmatic, instinctive judgments that people develop when they've spent 30 years watching the world go by from behind a diner counter. "I got a back room with a cot," she said, "for deliveries. It's not much. There's a space heater." "That'll do," Cole said. He settled Emma into the back room, which was exactly as described, a concrete-floored storage space with stacked boxes and a folding cot that had seen better decades. He plugged in the space heater. He found a blanket that was clean enough. Emma climbed onto the cot, still holding her doll, and looked at him with that steady, measuring expression. "You're going to leave," she said, "for a little while. I need to make some calls." "You're going to call someone, and they're going to come and take me back." "No," Cole said. "How do I know that?" Cole thought about this. "You don't," he said. "Not for sure. I could be lying to you." She considered this. "Are you?" "No." "Why should I believe you?" "You probably shouldn't," Cole said. "Not yet. You don't know me, but I'm the only person here and the night's getting colder, so it's a judgment call." Emma looked at him for a long time. Then she lay down on the cot and pulled the blanket up and tucked the doll under her chin. "Don't be gone too long," she said, and closed her eyes. Cole went back out through the diner, Patty watching him from the counter with her arms crossed, not hostile, just watchful, and pushed out the front door into the storm. The snow was coming heavier now. His bike was half buried. He brushed off the seat and pulled out his phone and stood beside the engine block in the dark because the engine was still marginally warm and he needed whatever warmth he could get while he made this call. It rang 4 times. "Yeah." The voice was rough and slow, the voice of a man who had learned decades ago that the appropriate response to a phone call at midnight is controlled wariness. "Hector," Cole said. A pause. "Cole." Another pause. "How bad?" Cole stood in the snow and looked at the diner lights and thought about a 6-year-old girl who had walked 12 miles alone rather than go back to the place where kids were supposed to be kept safe. "I need the lodge," Cole said. A long silence. Wind moved through the tree line beside the highway. Snow hissed against the gravel. How long? Hector said. I don't know yet. Okay. No argument, no questions, just the one word and the weight behind it that Cole had been counting on. How far out are you? Margine's on Route 9. That's 40 miles. Yeah. Roads are bad. I know. Bring her slow, Hector said. Lodge will be warm when you get here. A pause, and then lower. She okay? Cole looked at the diner, at the faint yellow light leaking from the windows. She's walking, he said. That's more than I expected. Hector made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite anything else. See you when I see you. And the line went dead. Cole stood in the snow for another minute, then he went back inside. The Iron Shepherds had been around long enough that most people in the county had formed an opinion about them without ever actually meeting one. The kind of opinion that gets built from rumor and appearance and the particular social machinery that makes people afraid of things they don't fully understand. Men in their 50s and 60s, most of them. Veterans, mechanics, former law, former wrong side of the law, men who'd worked hard and lost things and ended up here in the hill country because the hill country asked fewer questions than anywhere else. They ran the lodge, an old timber building 40 miles back in the trees that had been a hunting camp before Hector bought it with 20 years of savings. And they kept to themselves and they helped who they helped, and they didn't explain themselves to anyone who hadn't earned the conversation. Cole had been one of them for 3 years. He didn't wear the patch anymore. Hadn't, not since Diane and Rosie, but the brotherhood didn't work that way. You didn't stop being what you were because you took the jacket off. Hector had told him that the night Cole handed the cut back. It doesn't work like that, he'd said, and pressed the jacket back and walked away without waiting for an answer. Cole had driven 4 hours home and put the jacket in a box and put the box in the back of the closet and tried to figure out how to be a person who wasn't any particular thing at all. He'd been working on it for 3 years and hadn't made much progress. He went back to the storage room. Emma was asleep or doing an excellent impression of it. He stood in the doorway and watched her breathe for a moment, the small rise and fall of her chest, the doll tucked under her chin, the particular defenselessness of a child asleep that was somehow even more gutting than the watchfulness she'd had when awake. He sat on the floor outside the door, his back against the wall, his legs stretched out. He pulled out his phone and stared at it and tried to think clearly, which was getting harder because the fatigue was settling in now that the adrenaline had eased off. And fatigue always brought the thoughts that he spent the rest of his time out running. Rosie would be 10 now. He shut that door in his head with the practiced efficiency of long habit and focused. The situation, as far as he could see it, Emma had come from a group home or foster placement approximately 12 miles south on Route 6. She had left willingly under extreme weather conditions, which indicated that whatever she was leaving was something her 6-year-old brain had calculated as worse than a winter storm. She had injuries consistent with, he wasn't going to say the word, even in his own head, not until he knew more, with something he needed to know more about. She had reflexive wariness of adults, and specifically of the idea of being returned to any official structure. In the morning, someone would notice she was missing. They would file a report. Officers would come looking, and Cole's options would narrow significantly. He needed to understand before morning what he was actually dealing with. He thought about who he knew, who could make quiet inquiries without setting off bells in a system that might already be compromised. He thought about a woman named Grace, who worked in county administration 2 counties over and owed him a favor he'd never collected. He thought about a man named Ruiz, who had contacts in the state children's welfare office from before he retired. He thought about the fact that Emma had said, "I don't want to go back," rather than "I don't want to go to the police," or "I want my mom," which suggested she knew on some level that the official channels and the place she'd come from were connected in ways that did not work in her favor. That thought sat in him like a stone. He had seen cases. He had heard about cases. From Hector, from Jimmy, from other men who'd spent time in situations where the gap between what official systems claimed to do and what they actually did had cost people everything. Where the structure that was supposed to protect children had become, in specific, localized, shameful ways, something else entirely. Where the people with clipboards and official IDs and authority over small lives had discovered that authority could be bent. He was not going to assume that. Not yet. He needed more information, but he was also, he realized, not going to do nothing. He made 2 calls in the next hour, keeping his voice low, sitting in the corridor outside the storage room door, watching the snow press against the single high window at the end of the hall. Grace answered on the second ring. She was a night owl, had been as long as Cole knew her. He described the general situation without specifics, asked about foster placements in Garrett County, asked about anything unusual she'd heard in the last year. Grace's voice went careful, in a way that told him she'd heard something. She said she'd look into it. She said she'd call him back by morning. Ruiz didn't answer. Cole left a message. By the time he was done, it was past 2 in the morning. The storm was still going. The space heater in the storage room made a faint electrical hum. Cole stood up, his knees protesting in the specific way of a man who has spent too many years on a motorcycle and not enough years taking care of his joints, and looked in on Emma one more time. She was awake. She was lying completely still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, the doll under her chin. "Hey," Cole said. "You're still here," she said. "I said I would be." She thought about this. "Adults lie," she said. It wasn't accusatory. It was informational, the same tone she'd used to say the other true things. "Some of them," Cole said. "Lots of them." "Yeah." He didn't argue. "You hungry?" "Yes." He went out and found Patty still at the counter. She was staying, Cole realized, had been staying all along, not going home, just in case, and asked about food. Patty made eggs and toast and brought it back to the storage room without being asked. She set it on a box beside the cot and looked at Emma and said, "You need anything else, honey? You just holler." Emma looked at her with those grave eyes and said, "Thank you." And Patty went back out, and Cole heard the sound, very faint, of a woman trying to compose herself in a diner kitchen at 2 in the morning. Emma ate methodically, the whole plate. She was hungry in a way that didn't look like one meal's worth of missing. It looked like a longer deficit than that, the particular focused attention of someone eating against an absence. When she was done, she set the fork down precisely and looked at Cole. "There are other kids," she said. Cole went very still. "At the house," Emma said. "I left. But there are other kids there." "How many?" "I don't know. Some." "Are they okay?" Emma looked at the doll in her hands, ran her thumb over the worn fabric of its face, and said, in the same flat, careful voice she'd been using all night, "I don't know." That was what did it. Not the cold, not the walk, not the mark on her wrist, or the too big coat, or the eyes that should not have held what they held. It was those 3 words, delivered with the quiet devastation of a child who has learned that the world does not reliably care about the answer to that question. "I don't know." Cole leaned back against the storage room wall. His shoulder ached, his hands were stiff. He was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the writing. He looked at this 6-year-old girl who had walked through a blizzard and sat in the snow and asked a stranger if it was safe and eaten a plate of eggs at 2 in the morning with the focused practicality of someone who has learned not to waste food, and he thought about what the morning was going to bring, and he thought about Hector picking up the phone without asking questions, and he thought about 40 miles of bad road through a worse storm. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe," he said. "It's a long ride and it's going to be cold. I have gear. It won't be comfortable, but it'll be okay." Emma looked at him. "Where?" "Some friends of mine. The kind that help?" Cole thought about Hector and Jimmy and the rest of them, about the lodge and the trees, about what that word, brotherhood, actually meant when it was stripped of everything except what it was. "Yeah," he said, "the kind that help." Emma nodded. She pulled the blanket aside and stood up from the cot in one fluid motion, tucking the doll under her arm, and looked at him with that steady, measuring look. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." It took Cole 15 minutes to rig something workable. Patty found a spare insulated vest that she pressed on Cole without asking to be asked, and Cole layered Emma inside his jacket, her small body against his chest, her arms around him beneath the leather, the doll wedged safely under the jacket zipper, with just its worn-button face peering out into the dark. He strapped his helmet onto her head. It was grotesquely large on her, but better large than nothing, and wrapped his scarf around her neck and face until only her eyes showed. and she submitted to all of this with the wordless, practical patience that was beginning to feel, to Cole, like her defining characteristic. They went out into the storm together. The engine turned over on the first try. Of course it did. The Softail had never failed him when he needed it, which was more than he could say for most things in his life. Cole pulled out of the Margine's parking lot, feeling Emma's grip tighten around him as they hit the open road, feeling the small weight of her against his chest, and headed north into the blizzard. The next 40 miles were the longest Cole had ridden in years. The road was nearly invisible. He kept it slow, 30 miles an hour, sometimes less, reading the surface through the vibration of the frame, leaning into curves he knew from memory, watching the tree line for the landmarks he'd memorized in years of riding this route. Emma didn't make a sound. He could feel her breathing, even, controlled, that same impossible steadiness, and occasionally the slight shift of her position as she adjusted to a curve or a dip in the road. He thought about what she'd said. There are other kids. He thought about how she'd said it, matter of fact, informational, not as a plea, but as a statement of record. I left, but there are other kids there. The implications of that sentence spread out in his mind like the snow spreading across the road in the headlight's beam, endlessly, quietly, covering everything. An hour and 20 minutes after they left Margine's, the tree line opened on the left, and a gravel drive appeared, barely distinguishable from the snow around it, except that Cole knew exactly where it was. He turned in. The drive wound back through the pines for 300 yards, climbing slightly, and then the lodge appeared through the trees. The timber walls, the lights in the windows, the smoke rising from the chimney into the snow-heavy sky. On the porch, a figure. Broad-shouldered, jacket open despite the cold, standing with his arms crossed and watching the headlight come up the drive, with the particular stillness of a man who's learned that patience and observation are the same thing. Hector. Cole killed the engine at the bottom of the porch steps. Emma loosened her grip and he helped her down, unwrapping her from the layers, pulling his helmet off her head. Her hair was staticked in every direction, and her cheeks were deeply red, and she was looking at the lodge, at Hector on the porch, at the lights, at the whole improbable wooden structure out here in the trees, with an expression Cole couldn't fully read. Hector came down the porch steps. He was a big man, 61 years old, with a gray-streaked beard and the kind of face that had been rearranged by experience into something that was either intimidating or trustworthy, depending on what you were bringing to the encounter. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked down at Emma. Emma looked up at him. "She's cold," Hector said. "Yeah," Cole said. Hector crouched down, which for a man his size was a slow and deliberate production, until he was at her level. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said simply, "There's a fire inside, and there's soup, if you want it." Emma studied him. All of him. The beard, the jacket, the scars on his hands, the patches on his chest. "Are you one of the kind that help?" she asked. Something moved across Hector's face. He looked up at Cole for exactly 1 second, then back at Emma. "That's all we do," he said. Emma nodded. She turned to Cole. "You coming in?" "Right behind you," Cole said. She climbed the porch steps and pushed through the lodge door without waiting for anyone to hold it for her, and the warm yellow light swallowed her up. Cole stood at the bottom of the steps in the snow. Hector rose, slowly, and stood beside him, and they both looked at the door she'd gone through. "Grace called me," Hector said, 40 minutes ago. Cole looked at him. Hector's jaw was set. His eyes were doing something that wasn't quite readable in the porch light. "There have been 3 kids reported missing from Garrett County foster placements in the last 14 months, he said. 3. From the same network of homes, and every time the case got closed out in less than 60 days. He paused. "Grace says the closure paperwork came from the same desk each time." Cole stood in the snow and said nothing. "Same desk," Hector said again. 14 months, 3 kids. The wind moved through the pines. Snow fell without sound on the gravel drive. Somewhere inside the lodge, through the closed door and the thick timber walls, Cole could hear the faint sound of a fire, and beneath it, the quiet of a child finally in a warm room. 3 kids. Same network, same desk, and Emma, who had walked 12 miles through a blizzard rather than stay in a house where kids disappeared. And whoever, was going to come looking for her in the morning when they discovered she was gone. Cole looked at the lodge door. Then he looked at Hector. And the thing that settled between them in that moment, in the cold dark between falling snow and warm light, was not a plan and not a decision, and not even a conversation. It was older and simpler than any of those things. It was the specific, wordless understanding of men who have stood beside each other in bad situations before and know without asking what they're willing to do and what they're willing to risk and where the line is that they will not let anything cross. 3 kids. Emma made 4. "Tell me everything Grace told you," Cole said. And Hector opened his mouth to answer, but that was when Cole's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Cole answered it. The voice on the other end was male, flat, and unhurried in the specific way of someone who wants you to know they are not afraid of you. "We know where you are," the voice said, "and we know what you took. Bring her back by 6 a.m., or this becomes a problem you're not equipped to handle." The line went dead. Cole lowered the phone, looked at it, then looked up at Hector. Hector read his face. "How bad?" Hector said. Cole pocketed the phone. Snow kept falling. The lodge glowed behind them in the dark. "Start calling Jimmy," Cole said. "And Priest. Tell them to get here before dawn." The fire had burned down to coals by the time Jimmy arrived. Cole heard the bike before he saw the headlight. That particular engine note, slightly rough on the low end, that Jimmy had been meaning to fix for 2 years and never got around to. The sound cut through the pre-dawn quiet of the trees and then died. And a minute later, the lodge door opened and James Aurelio Vega walked in, stamping snow off his boots, his jacket dark with moisture, his face doing what Jimmy's face always did when something was wrong, going very still, very flat, every expression sealed behind a surface that told you exactly nothing about what was happening underneath. He was 54 years old, lean in the way of a man who forgot to eat when things got complicated, with a lined face and dark eyes that had spent 30 years cataloging rooms for exits and people for intentions. He'd done 2 tours before the thing that ended his service, which he had never described in detail to anyone at the lodge, and which Cole had never asked about. The scar on his right forearm he'd gotten somewhere else entirely, from a situation he described only as a misunderstanding in Tucson, and which Hector had once told Cole, very quietly, had involved saving a woman from a man who'd had about 6 inches and 100 pounds on Jimmy, and had still lost the encounter badly enough to require reconstructive surgery. Jimmy looked at Cole, looked at Hector, looked at the hallway that led toward the back rooms where Emma was sleeping. "How old?" he said. 6, Cole said. Jimmy's jaw tightened, just barely, a millimeter of movement that on his face registered like a shout. "Show me what you got," he said. They spread it out on the kitchen table, what little there was to spread. Hector's notes from the call with Grace, the 3 case numbers she'd pulled, names redacted but the pattern visible, 3 children, ages 5 to 9, reported missing from Garrett County foster placements over 14 months, every case closed in under 60 days with the same initialing on the closure paperwork. A set of initials that Hector had written at the top of the page and circled twice. DF. Jimmy looked at the initials for a long time. "Same person closed all 3, he said. "Same desk," Hector said. "Grace wouldn't say more than that on the phone. She's scared." "Grace doesn't scare easy." "No," Hector said. "She doesn't." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the storm had dropped from blizzard to a heavy, patient snowfall, the kind that accumulates without urgency. The lodge windows were dark mirrors. Cole stood at the counter with his 3rd coffee of the night, watching the other 2 men process, feeling the fatigue in his legs and the cold still deep in his shoulder, and underneath both of those things, the low, continuous vibration of something he couldn't name yet, but that he recognized. The feeling of a situation that has already decided what it's going to become, regardless of what anyone at this table chooses to do. "The call came from a burner," Cole said. "No trace." "How'd they find you that fast?" Jimmy asked. "I don't know." "You use your card anywhere tonight?" Cole thought. "Gas, 2 counties east around 4 o'clock. Surveillance on the pump?" "Probably." Jimmy exhaled slowly through his nose. So someone was already watching for her, already had a system in place to flag movement, already had your face or your plates in some kind of network. He tapped the table twice with one finger. That's not a couple of bad actors in a county office, Hector. I know what it is, Hector said. Say it. Hector looked at him steadily. Not until we know more. We know enough to be careful, Hector said. Flat, final. We don't know enough to be right. Jimmy sat back. His eyes went to the hallway again, involuntary, the way eyes go toward things that matter, even when you're trying to be tactical. She say anything else? He asked Cole. She said there are other kids still there. The kitchen went quieter than it had been before, which Cole hadn't thought was possible. Jimmy's hand stopped its slow rotation of the coffee mug. Hector stopped writing. The fire in the main room popped once, sharp, and then the silence closed back over everything. Still there, Jimmy said. That's what she said. She say how many? No. She know their names? I didn't push her. She's 6 and she'd been walking in a blizzard for 6 hours. I got what she gave me. Jimmy looked at him. Something in the look was not quite accusatory and not quite frustrated, and was something more complicated than either. The look of a man who understands both why a thing was done the way it was done, and also why a different approach might have yielded more information, and who is trying to hold both of those things at once without letting either one make him an asshole about it. Okay, Jimmy said. Okay. He rubbed his face with both hands. We need more than Grace. We need someone inside the system. I called Ruiz, Cole said. No answer. Ruiz is visiting his daughter in Phoenix, Hector said. Won't be back till after New Year's. Then we need someone else. Let me think about it. The door opened again. Cold came in with it, and Snow, and then Priest. His name was Daniel Carver, and nobody had called him Daniel since the army, and Priest was not a nickname that came from anything to do with spirituality, but from a long-ago incident in Fallujah that he had told the story of exactly once, to Hector, late at night, and which had earned him the name permanently and without irony. He was 58, heavy through the chest and shoulders, with a white-streaked beard and eyes so pale they looked colorless in most lighting conditions. He moved quietly for his size, always had, the way big men sometimes do when they've spent enough time in situations where noise was a liability. He came in, shed his jacket, stood in the kitchen doorway, and looked at the three of them. Tell me, he said. Hector told him. Efficiently, without editorializing, the way Hector did everything. Priest listened with his arms crossed and his eyes going from Hector to the table to Cole in a slow rotation. When Hector finished, Priest was quiet for a moment. The morning shift at County Children's Services starts at 7, Priest said. That's 4 hours. When they go to check on her, she's gone. They file a report, and by 8 o'clock, someone who doesn't want her found is already knowing she isn't where she's supposed to be. We know that, Cole said. What's the plan before 8? We're working on it. Priest's pale eyes settled on Cole. We need to know what we're in, not approximately, exactly. We don't have exactly yet. Then we get it. Priest? Cole. His voice wasn't raised. It never was. I rode 40 miles in a blizzard on 4 hours of sleep because Hector called, and I come when Hector calls. That's not a transaction that requires explanation. But I'm 60 days out from parole restrictions, and I've got a nephew starting college in the fall that I've been watching out for. And if I'm going to put myself in the middle of something that could blow all of that back to zero, I need to understand what it is I'm putting myself in the middle of. The kitchen was very quiet. Cole looked at him. Really looked at him. At the lines around his eyes and the set of his jaw and the specific quality of the stillness he was holding, which was not the stillness of a man threatening anything, but the stillness of a man who has paid for decisions with years of his life and has therefore earned the right to ask what he's buying. I don't know yet, Cole said. That's the honest answer. Something is wrong with how kids are moving through the county system. 3 gone in 14 months. Same paperwork trail. Someone on the outside already knew Emma was missing inside of 2 hours and had my plate or my face on a watch list. That's everything I've got. Priest absorbed this. His jaw worked slightly. Where's the girl? He said. Back room, sleeping. He looked at the hallway for a moment, Then he uncrossed his arms and pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. "Okay," he said. "So we figure out what we're in." That was all. No further explanation. Cole felt something in his chest that was close to gratitude and too complicated to name. The four of them sat at the kitchen table as the snow came down outside and the fire burned low in the next room, and the darkness before dawn pressed against the lodge windows, and they started working through what they knew, what they needed to know, and what they were going to do about it. It was Jimmy who first said the name out loud. It came from the third case, the closure paperwork Grace had been able to pull the most detail on. The child, a 7-year-old boy, listed as Marcus L., placed in a home on the eastern edge of Garrett County's network, reported missing 11 months ago. Case closed 48 days later with a notation that the child had been transferred to a private residential facility at family request. The initialing on the closure, DF. And below the initials, so faint that Grace had almost missed it and had only caught it because she'd enlarged the scan, a contractor ID number. A number that connected through 2 layers of administrative database to a name. Darren Foe, Jimmy said. He said it the way you say a name when you're not sure what it is yet, but you want it in the room where everyone can look at it. Hector wrote it down. Transport contractor, Jimmy said. Licensed through the state, moves kids between placements, between facilities, sometimes across county lines for court-mandated situations. Fully credentialed, background checked. He paused. On paper. Off paper? Cole said. Jimmy looked at him. That's what we need to find out. Cole had been awake for over 20 hours at this point. He was aware of his body in the specific way of extreme fatigue, not the heavy sluggishness of ordinary tiredness, but the hyperclarity of exhaustion, where every sensation is slightly too bright and the mind starts making connections faster than it can vet them. He knew this state. He'd been in it in other contexts, worse contexts, and he knew that it produced both insight and error in equal and unpredictable measure. He tried to stay with the facts. A name, Darren Foe. Transport contractor. Moving kids. Emma. Walking 12 miles in a blizzard. There are other kids. 3 case numbers, same initials, same desk, and somewhere behind all of it, a phone call at midnight from a man who spoke the way people speak when they are accustomed to consequences falling on other people. We know where you are. Bring her back by 6 a.m. Cole looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. 4:17 a.m. Less than 2 hours. We're not bringing her back, Cole said. Nobody said we were, Hector said. I want it said out loud. Hector looked at him steadily. We're not bringing her back. Cole looked at Priest. Nobody's going anywhere they don't choose to go, Priest said. Quietly, with the weight of a man who has thought carefully about what he means before he says it. Cole looked at Jimmy. Jimmy had his phone out. I'm going to find out what I can on Darren Foe before the sun comes up, he said, already typing. You should sleep. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're 20 hours in and you're running on coffee and adrenaline and you're going to start making decisions based on emotion instead of information if you don't get 2 hours. He didn't look up from the phone. She's safe. We're here. Sleep. Cole stood at the counter for a moment longer. Then he put down his coffee cup and went down the hallway. He didn't go to any of the spare rooms. He stopped in the hallway outside the room where Emma was sleeping and sat down against the wall, his back against the timber, his legs stretched out, and was asleep in under 3 minutes. He woke to the sound of movement. Not alarming movement. Not the sharp, sudden sounds of threat, but the small, deliberate sounds of a child trying very hard not to wake anyone. Cole opened his eyes. Gray light was coming under the door at the end of the hallway, dawn or the particular non-dawn of a heavily overcast morning. His left shoulder had locked up completely during the 2 hours he'd been on the floor, and his lower back was informing him with considerable detail about his life choices. He looked at his watch. 6:44 a.m. He got up and pushed open the door. Emma was sitting on the edge of the cot, fully dressed. She'd slept in her clothes, he realized, either because she was cold or because she wanted to be ready to move, with her doll in her lap and her hands folded over it. She was looking at the window, which showed a rectangle of low gray sky and snow-laden pine branches. She turned when he came in, and her face did its characteristic thing. A quick, comprehensive assessment, followed by a settling, the way a scale settles when what's put on it is lighter than expected. You slept in the hall, she said. Yeah, because you didn't want to leave. It wasn't a question. Cole sat down on the floor across from her, his back against the wall. How'd you sleep? He asked. Okay. A pause. I heard the others come in. They're good people. She looked at him. The big one with the white beard looked at me. When? Last night, before I fell asleep. He looked in the door. She paused. He didn't say anything. He just looked, and then he left. Cole thought about Priest, who would have checked on the room because Priest checked everything, cataloged everything, and had never in Cole's experience of him done it because he was looking for a reason to be afraid. He did it because he wanted to know that what needed protecting was intact. That's just who he is, Cole said. Emma seemed to accept this. She looked back at the window. It stopped snowing, she said. Yeah. Are they coming? Cole looked at her. She was still looking at the window. People are going to notice you're gone, he said, carefully. People from where you were staying, they'll file a report. And then they'll come. Maybe. They'll come, she said, flat, certain. They always come when a kid runs. Have you run before? A small pause. Once. What happened? Emma's hands moved slightly on the doll, a small adjustment of grip. I came back, she said. And that was all she said, and Cole did not push because the way she said it, I came back, not they brought me back, but I came back, contained something in it that was worse than whatever the alternative version might have been. It's going to be different this time, Cole said. Emma looked at him, direct. You can't promise that. No, Cole said. I can't. She held his gaze. But you're going to try. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the other kids, Danny and Marcus and Leah, do you know about them? Cole went still. Tell me, he said. Emma looked at the window. Danny's 8. He has a picture in his head of a house with a backyard that his social worker told him about. He talks about it all the time. The backyard. She said it the way children say things that have the weight of importance without fully understanding why they're important. He believes her, that he's going to get there someday. Cole said nothing. Marcus is 9. He was sick last week. He had a fever and nobody took him to a doctor. She paused. I know because I heard him at night, through the wall. And Leah? Emma's hands tightened on the doll. Leah doesn't talk, she said. She used to, but she stopped. The room was very quiet. Outside, a bird moved in the pine branches and snow fell from them in a soft collapse. Cole thought about a 9-year-old with a fever and no doctor. About a little girl who had stopped talking. About a boy with a picture in his head of a backyard that existed, he now suspected, only as a mechanism to make children cooperative. He thought about what kind of people used a child's hope as a tool and what they used it for, and the thought moved through him like something cold and very old. Okay, he said, we know their names now. Emma looked at him. That matters? Yes, Cole said. It matters a lot. He went out to the kitchen. Jimmy was still at the table, surrounded by handwritten notes and a laptop that looked like it had been running all night. Priest was standing at the window with a coffee. Hector was on the phone, turned away, speaking in a low voice. The kitchen smelled like coffee and wood smoke and the particular male silence of men who have been working through something serious for hours. Jimmy looked up when Cole came in. Darren Foe, he said. 43 years old, licensed transport contractor for the state, Garrett, and 2 adjacent counties. Clean record, no priors. Before the contractor work, he was in logistics, moving freight, coordinating dispatch. Owns a property in Garrett County proper and leases warehouse space outside Millhaven, about 30 miles east. Leases warehouse space, Cole said, for the transport business, technically. Jimmy's voice was flat. Vehicles, documentation, coordination of placement transfers, all of it legitimate on paper. And off paper, Jimmy turned the laptop around. A series of administrative records, cross-referenced with dates. 3 kids. Case numbers match Grace's. Every closure with Foe's contractor ID in the chain. Every single transfer in those cases going through one of two vehicles registered to his company. He paused. And then the kids stop appearing in the system. Stop appearing, Cole said. Not moved to another placement, not aged out, not reunified with family, just stop, as if the system forgot they existed. Cole stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table and thought about Danny's backyard and Marcus's fever and Leah, who had stopped talking. He's moving them, Cole said. That's what it looks like, Jimmy said. Where, I don't know yet. But someone is paying for that to happen, and someone in the county system is making the paperwork disappear afterward. Hector hung up the phone. Everyone looked at him. He set the phone on the counter and turned around, and his face was doing something that Cole had seen it do before, in bad situations. A kind of compression, all the reaction being pressed inward and held there, so that what showed on the surface was just stillness. Just the absolute controlled stillness of a man processing something difficult and deciding how to respond to it. That was a friend of mine at the state level, Hector said. She pulled Foe's contractor history across all 3 counties. And, Jimmy said, 14 kids in the last 2 years, 14 documented transfers that Foe handled, all through foster placements, all in the low visibility category. Kids with no family network, no active advocates, no one checking in regularly. He paused. Of those 14, 11 have dropped out of the system. No forwarding placement, no record of outcome. 11. The word landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a height. Cole counted it out. 14 months, Grace had said, for the 3 cases she'd pulled, but Hector's contact was saying 2 years and 11 kids. 11, Priest said. From the window, his voice was very quiet. 11, Hector confirmed. Nobody said anything for a moment. Cole thought about the phone call. We know where you are. Bring her back by 6 a.m., or this becomes a problem you're not equipped to handle. It was past 7 now. The deadline had passed. They know we didn't comply, Cole said. Yes, Hector said, which means the next move is theirs. Which means we need to know what the next move looks like before they make it, Jimmy said. Cole looked at Hector. Your contact at the state level? She's not going to go official, Hector said. Not yet. The problem is we don't know how deep it goes. If there's a connection between whoever Foe is working for and people inside the official reporting structure, making noise in the wrong direction is going to tip them off, and whatever evidence exists disappears in 24 hours. So we can't go to the police, Priest said. Not the county, Hector said. State. Not until we have something solid enough that they can't make it go away. Priest set down his coffee. So we're doing this ourselves. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Another silence. Jimmy closed the laptop. Outside, a vehicle moved on the road at the end of the drive, too far away to identify, gone before anyone could check. Every head turned toward the window. Cole's hand was on his phone before he decided to reach for it. The vehicle kept going, didn't slow, didn't turn. Everyone breathed again. We need to know what's in that warehouse, Cole said. Cole, Hector started. I'm not saying we go tonight. I'm saying we need to know. If Foe is using it as a transit point, there might be a window, a pattern. Kids don't get moved without some kind of schedule. There's logistics involved, transportation, coordination with wherever they're going. If we can map the schedule, we can figure out when, and we can figure out how. And then what? Priest said. And then we figure out the rest. Priest looked at him for a long moment. That's not a plan. That's a direction. It's what we've got. It's what you've got, Priest said. The rest of us are deciding whether to go the same direction. The kitchen went tight. Cole felt it. The specific tension of men who are not arguing yet, but are close to it. The air getting dense with the things nobody was quite saying. He looked at Priest, who was looking back at him with those colorless eyes that gave nothing away and demanded everything in return. You said you came when Hector called, Cole said. I did. This is what he called about. You called about a girl in the snow, Priest said. Now you're talking about a transport contractor and 11 missing kids in a warehouse and an organization that already has eyes on your movements. Those are not the same conversation. They are now. Are they? Priest's voice was still quiet, still without heat. Because here's what I'm hearing, Cole. I'm hearing a man who hasn't slept more than 2 hours, who found a kid and made a decision in the dark, and is now trying to build a justification for that decision around a table at 7 in the morning. And I'm not saying the decision was wrong. I'm saying the justification needs to be cleaner than it's what we've got before I put myself between what you found last night and whatever is on the other side of that phone call. Cole looked at him. He wanted to argue. The arguing was right there, lined up, ready. He had the adrenaline for it, had the certainty for it, had the image of Emma's face in the parking lot. Is it safe in there? Ready to deploy as evidence of what was at stake. He didn't, because Priest was right. Not about the decision. The decision had been right. He was sure of it in a way that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with something more fundamental than logic. But about the justification, about the difference between I know this is true and I can show you this is true. What do you need? Cole said. Priest's jaw relaxed slightly, just slightly. I need to know we're not acting on incomplete information in a way that destroys the thing we're trying to protect. Meaning, if we go at this wrong, if we make noise in the wrong place, if we spook whoever is running foe, if we give them a reason to move the kids faster or cover their tracks harder, we lose the chance to find them. He paused. 11 kids, Cole. Not just the ones in that house. 11 kids already in the system somewhere. If we go in loud, those 11 become a number that doesn't change. The kitchen was very quiet. Cole stood with that for a moment, fully, without pushing it away or building around it. He let it settle into him the way difficult things need to settle before you can respond to them properly. Okay, he said. So we go quiet. We go smart, Priest said. Quiet and smart. Same thing. Not always. The back hallway door opened. Everyone turned. Emma stood in the kitchen doorway. She'd found her way from the back room to the kitchen without anyone guiding her, without asking for directions, navigating the unfamiliar lodge in the gray morning light with the same self-contained precision she did everything. She was holding her doll. Her hair was brushed. She'd found a bathroom somewhere and tried to make herself orderly, which for some reason was the detail that hit Cole hardest of all. She looked at the men around the table, at Hector, at Jimmy's notes, at Priest by the window, at Cole standing in the middle of the kitchen. You're talking about the warehouse, she said. Everyone went still. Cole crouched down. You know about it? Emma looked at him. Mr. Foe talked on his phone. Before. When he came to the house. He thought no one was listening. She paused. I was behind the door. Cole waited. He said something about Millhaven. She said it carefully, the way children say unfamiliar proper nouns, making sure they have the sounds right. And he said the next transport. And he said a date. She stopped. Do you remember the date? Cole said. Emma looked at him. Her face was very serious. January 3rd, she said. Cole looked up at Jimmy. Jimmy looked at the calendar on his phone. That's 4 days from now, Jimmy said. The kitchen absorbed this. 4 days. The warehouse in Millhaven, a transport already scheduled, and somewhere in a house on Route 6, a boy named Danny who believed in a backyard, a boy named Marcus with a fever, and a girl named Leah who had stopped talking, all of them inside a system that had already lost 11 children and was preparing to lose more. 4 days. We need eyes on that warehouse, Cole said. We need more than eyes, Hector said. He picked up his pen. We need to know who Foe is moving the kids for. We need to know where they go after Millhaven. And we need to know, He paused, and the pause had weight. How high up the food chain this goes before we make any move at all. 4 days isn't much time. No, Hector said. It isn't. Priest moved away from the window. He picked up his jacket from the back of a chair and shrugged into it. I know someone, he said. Everyone looked at him. Girl named Sasha. He said it matter-of-factly, already zipping the jacket. 19. She bounced through county foster placements for 4 years before she aged out last spring. She knows the system from the inside, the real inside, not the paperwork, and she's been living near Millhaven for the last 8 months. She know anything about Foe? Jimmy asked. I don't know, Priest said. But she's smart and she's careful, and if something like this has been happening in that corner of the county for 2 years, she's heard something. He paused. And she trusts me. How do you know her? Cole asked. Priest looked at him. The colorless eyes did something that was almost a softening. She was in the system at the same time as my nephew, he said, quietly. He was 11, she was 15. She looked out for him. Another pause. I never forgot that. The kitchen was quiet in a different way now, a more complete way. Emma had been standing in the doorway through all of this. She looked at Priest. Priest looked at her, and the thing that passed between them was something Cole couldn't have put words to but recognized. The recognition between two people who have navigated the same kind of landscape, who have read the same kind of rooms, who have learned to assess safety in the same particular way that you only learn when safety has been something you had to earn rather than something you were given. The girl named Sasha, Emma said. Is she okay? Priest looked at her for a moment. She's okay, he said. She's tough. Emma nodded, very seriously. Okay, she said. And she went to the table and pulled out a chair and sat down, and looked around at all of them with those grave, watchful eyes. It was the most deliberate thing Cole had seen her do, the most decisive, not asking permission, not waiting to be included, simply arriving at the table and sitting down as though her presence there was a matter of fact, as though she'd made a calculation about where she belonged in this conversation and had acted on it. Hector looked at her, then at Cole. Cole gave him nothing, just waited. Hector picked up his pen. All right, he said, here's what we do. They worked for 3 hours. Jimmy on the laptop, running down everything on Darren Foe that could be run down through non-official channels, business registrations, vehicle registrations, the names attached to the warehouse lease in Mill Haven, Priest on his phone reaching Sasha through a number he had memorized rather than stored, talking in the low, careful shorthand of someone who understood how to be discreet. Hector building a picture of the county placement network from the outside, cross-referencing Grace's information with what Jimmy was finding, trying to identify which nodes in the system were clean and which ones had Foe's contractor fingerprints on them. Cole sat with Emma. They didn't talk much. She ate the breakfast that Hector made, eggs again and toast, and a glass of orange juice that she drank in 3 long pulls. And Cole drank coffee and watched the morning come up gray and heavy through the lodge windows. And occasionally Emma asked him questions that were precise and practical and indicated she was tracking the larger situation more carefully than any adult would have expected a 6-year-old to track. At one point she said, "If they come here, what happens?" "We deal with it," Cole said. "How?" "Depends on who comes." She considered this. "What if it's police?" Cole looked at her. "Legitimate police or people using badges?" Emma's eyebrows moved slightly. Barely a movement, but Cole caught it. The fact that she'd immediately understood the distinction without any explanation told him something about what she'd seen. "People using badges," she said quietly. "Then we deal with it differently," Cole said. "Which way?" "The way that keeps you safe," he said. She looked at him for a long time. Then she went back to her eggs. It was Jimmy who brought everything to a stop at 10:30 a.m. He looked up from the laptop. His face was doing the flat, sealed thing it did when what was underneath was something serious. "I found something," he said. Everyone looked at him. "The warehouse lease in Mill Haven." He turned the laptop so everyone could see. "It's registered to a shell company. The shell company goes through 2 parent entities before you hit anything with a name attached to it." He paused. "The name, when you get there, is a county administrator, Child Welfare Division, Garrett County." He stopped. Priest said nothing. Hector said nothing. Cole looked at the name on the screen. He'd never heard it before. It meant nothing to him on its own, a name like any other name. But what it meant in context, what it meant for a county administrator responsible for child welfare placements to have their name at the end of a chain of entities that included the warehouse where a transport contractor moved kids who subsequently disappeared from the system. That was not nothing. That was the opposite of nothing. "The system is the problem," Cole said. "Part of the system," Hector said carefully. "Enough of it," Cole said. They sat with it. The fire in the next room had burned low again. Outside, a wind moved through the pines and shed snow from the upper branches in a brief white cascade that caught the light for a moment and then was gone. Priest's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. The subtle recalibration of a man who has received information that changes the geometry of a situation. "Sasha," he said. "What?" Hector said. Priest looked up from the phone. "She says she's been watching the warehouse for 3 months." He set the phone down on the table, looked at it. "She says there are kids in there right now." No one moved. "Right now," Cole said. "Right now," Priest said. Emma, who had been sitting quietly at the corner of the table, looked at Cole. Cole looked at Hector. Hector looked at the name on Jimmy's laptop screen, at the phone in Priest's hand, at the 4 days they'd thought they had, and the fact that they no longer had them. He looked at Cole, and in that look was everything. The weight of 11 names in 4 days that had just collapsed to nothing. The warehouse in Millhaven, where right now, in this moment, whatever was happening, and the specific, clean, irreversible understanding that the moment you know something like this and choose to do nothing, you become a different person than you were before you knew it. "Get the bikes ready," Hector said. Cole was already standing. That was when Priest's phone rang again. Not a text, a call. And when Priest looked at the screen, the thing that crossed his face, the thing that crossed the face of a man who had not visibly reacted to anything in the last 4 hours, was something close to alarm. "It's Sasha," he said. "She says there's a vehicle at the warehouse they didn't have before." His voice was very level. "A transport van. It's loading." The room came apart into motion. Jimmy was up, laptop shut. Hector was already moving for the door. Cole looked at Emma. She was looking at him, perfectly still, her hand on the doll. "I'll be back," he said. "You said that before," she said. "I meant it then too." Emma looked at him. Her face was doing the careful, calculating thing. Then she said, "Danny's afraid of the dark. If you find him—" She stopped. "Tell him Emma says it's okay," Cole said. A pause. The smallest pause. And then Emma nodded once, and Cole went out the door into the cold morning air. And behind him he heard Hector saying, low and fast, to someone he was already calling, "We need to move. We need eyes. I need you to—" The Softail's engine turned over. The others came out behind him, one by one, leather jackets in the gray morning air, bikes coming alive with that deep sequential thunder that rolled out through the trees and up into the overcast sky. Cole leaned over the handlebar. His shoulder was screaming. His eyes were dry from fatigue and cold. 40 miles to Millhaven and a transport van that was loading, and somewhere behind him in the lodge a 6-year-old girl who had walked 12 miles through a blizzard and sat down at a table with 4 scarred men and told them the names of children that nobody else in the world was looking for. He pulled out of the drive. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to look back. But as the trees closed in around the gravel drive and the lodge disappeared behind him and the road opened up ahead, he let himself think for just one moment about Danny's backyard, about Marcus's fever, about Leah who had stopped talking, and then Hector's bike was beside him, and Jimmy's, and Priest's, and the 4 of them hit the county road together in the gray December morning with the kind of terrible, quiet purpose that doesn't need to announce itself, and the engines echoed off the tree line, and then the road straightened, and they were gone. The warehouse in Millhaven was 30 miles ahead, and the transport van was already loading. The road to Millhaven was 30 miles of frozen asphalt and bad decisions. Cole felt every mile in his shoulder, in his hands, in the specific bone-deep exhaustion of a man running on 2 hours of floor sleep and enough adrenaline to keep a smaller person upright for a week. The Softail ate the road beneath him with that steady, indifferent power that he'd always trusted more than he'd trusted most people. And the gray December air came at his face like something with an agenda. And beside him, and behind him, the other 3 bikes held their formation with the wordless, habitual precision of men who had done this before in other configurations and other weathers, and for other reasons, but always with this same quality of motion. Deliberate, contained, committed. Hector rode point. He always rode point. It was not a decision that had ever been made out loud. It was simply a fact of how the Iron Shepherds moved, the same way certain facts about the natural world are simply true without requiring explanation. Hector knew roads the way some people knew people, intuitively, with a depth of attention that didn't announce itself but was always operating. He took them off the county road at the first fork and onto a back route that added 4 miles, but avoided 2 intersections where, in a situation like this one, visibility was a liability. Jimmy rode Cole's left. Priest had dropped back 50 yards. Priest always rode with space between himself and the others, not from isolation, but from the tactical habit of a man who had spent years in situations where clustering made you a single target. Cole could see him in his left mirror, a dark shape in the gray morning, steady as a fixed point. Nobody used the comms. There was nothing to say that hadn't been said. Sasha's last message had come in as they were pulling out of the lodge drive. Van still here. 2 men outside, maybe more inside. Be careful. Then nothing. Priest had tried her twice on the road and gotten no answer, which could mean she'd gone quiet for safety reasons, or could mean something else, and Cole was keeping that possibility in a box in the back of his mind, locked, because opening it right now would not help anything. The warehouse district outside Millhaven was not a district so much as a scatter. A half-dozen industrial buildings spread across a flat, scrubby area east of the town proper, connected by service roads that the county had paved in the 80s and not maintained since. In summer, it would be bleak. In December, under snow and low cloud, it was something beyond bleak, something that had passed through bleak and come out the other side into a kind of landscape that felt genuinely hostile, as though the terrain itself had opinions about who belonged there. Hector pulled them off the service road a quarter-mile out from the target address. A tree line, sparse, mostly scrub pine and bare hardwood, ran along the south edge of the property. Enough cover to park the bikes and move on foot without being immediately visible from the building. It wasn't perfect. It was what they had. They killed the engines. The silence that came in after was different from normal silence. Not the silence of a quiet morning, but the silence of suppressed activity. The specific quality of a place where things are happening just beyond the range of your hearing and you know it. Cole got off the bike. His legs were solid. He was past the phase of fatigue where your body wobbles. He was in the further phase where everything becomes very simple, where the body stops complaining and starts just executing because it has no other option. He'd been in this place before. He knew how to use it, and he knew how long it lasted, and he didn't have time to think about either. They gathered at the tree line, 4 men in leather jackets in the pale gray morning, breath showing, standing close enough to speak without volume. Hector looked at each of them in turn. A brief, comprehensive look that asked and answered a question simultaneously. "Talk to me about the building," he said to Jimmy. Jimmy pulled out a folded paper. He'd printed a satellite image from the lodge before they left, one of the few places he'd allowed himself to waste 30 seconds. Single structure, loading bay on the east face, 2 roll-up doors, personnel entrance on the south, near the corner, what looks like a secondary access on the north face, probably a fire exit, parking area in front, east side. He tapped the paper. "We're south. The van would be on the east side near the loading bay." "We can't see the east face from here," Cole said. "No. We need to get to the south corner. From there we can see the east side and the personnel door." "That's 40 yards of open ground," Priest said. "In this light, with this cloud cover, that's manageable." Priest looked at the sky, looked at the ground, made a small movement with his jaw that was as close as he got to conceding a point. "I go first," Cole said. "No," Hector said. "Hector." "Jimmy goes first. Jimmy is faster and lower profile. You go second. I go third." He looked at Priest. "You stay with the bikes." Priest looked at him. "I didn't ride 40 miles to watch motorcycles. You rode 40 miles because I called you. And right now I need someone at the bikes who can move them if we need to move fast, and who can make a call if we don't come back in 20 minutes. Hector held his gaze. "That person is you, because you're the best driver of all of us, and because if this goes wrong, you're the one who can get back to Emma." The name landed in the group like a stone dropped in water, small, immediate, rippling. Priest looked at him for a long moment. 20 minutes, he said. 20 minutes, Hector confirmed. They moved. Jimmy went first, crossing the open ground in a low, fast movement that covered the distance in under 15 seconds. Cole went next, running in a different line, and the cold air hit him hard and his shoulder flared once in protest, and then he was at the building's south wall, pressed against the corrugated metal, the cold of it coming through his jacket immediately. Hector came last, slower, with the deliberate economy of a big man who has learned not to waste motion on speed when precision matters more. They moved along the south wall toward the east corner. The metal was cold enough that Cole could feel it through his gloves where his knuckles brushed it. The ground underfoot was a mixture of frozen mud and gravel, each step requiring conscious care to stay quiet. Somewhere behind the building, a motor ran. Not a vehicle engine, something fixed, a generator or a ventilation unit. Cole reached the southeast corner and stopped. He looked around it. The transport van was there. White, unmarked, backed up to the nearer of the two roll-up doors. Both rear doors stood open. One of the roll-up doors was open maybe 3 feet. Not all the way, just enough for a man to move through sideways with cargo. The cargo, in this case, being what it was. 2 men stood near the van. One was smoking, leaning against the van's passenger side, facing away. The other was at the roll-up door, talking to someone inside. Cole couldn't see who, could only see the back of the man at the door, the way he was standing, the posture of someone receiving instructions rather than giving them. No children visible from this angle. Cole pulled back around the corner. Hector and Jimmy were right behind him. 2 outside, Cole said, barely breath level. Van at the loading door, doors up about 3 feet. Anyone else? Jimmy said. Can't tell. Someone inside near the door. Could be more further in. Hector's jaw worked. We need to know how many before we do anything. We don't have time to... Cole. Hector's voice was very quiet and very final. We don't go in blind, not with kids inside. Cole stopped, forced himself to stop. The adrenaline wanted him to move, wanted the forward motion that had been building since Priest's phone rang at the lodge table. He held it where it was and made himself think. The secondary entrance, he said. North face. Fire exit, Jimmy said. If it's alarmed, it'll tell us something. If it's not, it's a logistics warehouse, Hector said slowly. They need to move things in and out. There'll be a secondary access that's working. Give me 5 minutes, Cole said. Hector looked at him. 5 minutes, Cole said again. A pause. Then a short nod. Cole went around the south wall the other way, past the personnel entrance, which was a plain metal door with a push bar, no keypad visible, either unlocked or on a simple latch, and around the southwest corner. The north face of the building faced the tree line at the back of the property, a narrow gap of frozen ground maybe 15 feet wide before the scrub brush started. The fire exit was there, a metal door with a push bar, propped open about 4 inches with what looked, as Cole got closer and crouched down to look, like a work glove folded and wedged in the frame, propped open from the inside. Someone was in there who wanted a way out they didn't have to think about. Cole went back to Hector and Jimmy, reported it in 8 words. Fire exit, propped. From inside. Someone's helping us. Hector and Jimmy exchanged a look. Sasha, Jimmy said. Has to be, Cole said. Hector closed his eyes for 3 seconds, opened them. All right, here's how we do this. Cole goes in through the fire exit. I go to the personnel door on the south, not inside, just at the door, watching. Jimmy moves to the east corner and watches the van. Nobody makes a move until Cole tells us what's inside. He looked at Cole. You go in, you assess, you come back, and tell us. You do not engage. You do not make contact. You count heads, and you come back. And if they're loading the van while I'm counting heads, then you tell us and we reassess. We could lose the window. Cole. Hector put a hand on his arm. Briefly, the specific weight of it. Trust me. Cole breathed, nodded. He went around to the north face. The fire exit door swung inward silently on well-oiled hinges, which told him someone had been through it enough times to notice when it needed maintenance, or had oiled it recently with intention. The gap the glove created was wide enough for him to get his fingers around the edge and ease it open without disturbing the wedge. Inside, darkness, relative to the exterior. His eyes adjusted in seconds. The warehouse interior was a single large space bisected by a temporary partition wall, plywood on a metal frame, the kind of thing you put up when you need to subdivide a space quickly without a permit. The partition ran roughly down the middle of the building, north to south, creating 2 chambers, Cole was in the back half, the one farthest from the loading bay. There were boxes stacked along the walls, real freight, the kind of thing that makes a logistics business look legitimate to anyone who doesn't look too carefully. Overhead, two industrial light fixtures, one dark and one casting a pale yellow light that did more to create shadows than eliminate them. Cole moved inside and let the door settle back to its 4-inch gap behind him. He heard the children before he saw them. Not crying, not calling out. Just the particular quality of small, restrained breathing. The sound of children who have learned that being heard gets you nothing good. He moved along the back wall of the partition toward a gap in the plywood. Not a door, just an incomplete seal where two panels didn't quite meet, and looked through. The front half of the warehouse was warmer. Someone had set up a space heater, a large one, and the heat was concentrated in the near section of the front chamber, not evenly distributed, but enough that it was warmer than the loading bay end, where the roll-up door was open and the cold came in freely. 4 children. Cole counted them twice. A boy against the left wall, maybe 8, sitting with his knees up, his arms around them, his eyes fixed on something between the floor and nowhere. A younger boy, maybe 7, sitting beside him close enough to be touching, head down. A girl of perhaps 7 or 8 curled into herself near the space heater, a thin blanket around her shoulders that was too small to cover her properly. And a 4th child, a boy, older, maybe 9 or 10, who was not sitting but standing near the center of the space, and who, Cole registered with a specific cold precision, was shaking with the fine tremor that doesn't come from cold alone, but from fever. Marcus. Cole thought the name immediately. Emma had said Marcus had a fever. He counted the adults. 2 men in the front chamber, both standing near the loading bay end, both with their backs mostly to the children, talking in low voices. A 3rd man was visible through the open roll-up door, outside, loading something into the van, the man who'd been smoking. Cole did not see the 2 men who'd been by the van entrance from the outside, which meant they were somewhere he couldn't see, or they'd gone inside through the loading bay, or there was a 3rd configuration he hadn't accounted for. He was pulling back from the gap to return to Hector when he heard the voice. It came from the far end of the front chamber, past the 2 men near the loading bay, from somewhere in the darker section beyond the space heater's range. A man's voice, not raised, not angry, the controlled, professional voice of someone conducting ordinary business. The transfer's in 4 days originally, but we're moving it up given the situation. Tonight. The Garrett girl getting out changes the math. Cole went completely still. She went to a biker. A different voice, from outside the roll-up door. The man who'd been smoking. Who is he? Doesn't matter who he is. The first voice. What matters is containment. By tonight, this location is empty, and we're out of the county. The Carver girl's been watching this place, the 3rd voice said, from somewhere inside. For weeks. A pause. The Carver girl's going to be a problem regardless, the first voice said. Bring her in when you get a chance. Cole's blood went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. The Carver girl. Carver. Priest's name was Daniel Carver. Sasha was the girl who'd looked out for Priest's nephew in the system, who Priest had reached through a number he'd memorized rather than stored, who had propped a fire door open from the inside. These men knew Sasha's name. They knew she'd been watching. They knew about the biker. Not Cole's name, maybe, not yet, but enough. And they were talking about her with the specific casual finality of people who have dealt with problems before by making the problems go away. Cole moved, back along the wall, back to the fire door, out into the cold north face, letting the door settle on its 4-inch gap. He went around the building, came to Hector at the personnel door, put his mouth 2 inches from Hector's ear. 4 kids inside, 2 men in the main space, at least 1 more in a back section I couldn't fully see, plus 3 outside rotating positions near the van. A pause. They're moving tonight, not in 4 days, tonight. And they know about Sasha. Hector's jaw muscle moved. Once. They said her name, Hector said. They said the Carver girl. They said bring her in. Hector looked at him for 2 seconds. Then he looked at the building. Then he pulled out his phone and called Priest. It rang once. Sasha, Hector said when Priest answered. You need to call her right now and get her out of wherever she is. These people know she's been watching and they're going to come for her. Cole could hear Priest's voice through the phone. Not the words, but the tone of it, the quick, sharp quality of a man updating his assessment of a situation in real time. Then Priest said something and Hector said, Now, Daniel, and ended the call. He looked at Cole. Jimmy, he said. They moved to the east corner. Jimmy was there, pressed against the building, watching the van with the focused patience of a man who's been waiting in worse conditions than this for longer than this. He registered their arrival with a slight turn of his head. Hector reported in 15 words. Jimmy listened. His face went through nothing visible and came out the other side different in a way that was all in the eyes. How many total? Jimmy said. Minimum 5, Cole said. Probably more. Kids? 4. One of them's sick. The one Emma said. Marcus. Jimmy looked at the van, at the building, at the gray sky above. They load those kids in that van tonight, he said, and we lose them. Yes, Hector said, and if we go in now, we don't know what we're walking into. No, Hector said, and we can't call county because county's got Foe's people in it. Not all of it, Hector said, but enough that we can't trust the channel. Jimmy was quiet for a moment. The generator motor sound continued somewhere around the back of the building. The roll-up door was still up 3 feet. Through the gap, Cole could see the lower half of one of the men inside standing still, facing the children. State investigators, Jimmy said. We'd need enough to bring them in fast without going through the county structure, Hector said. My contact at the state level. She can make that call, but she needs something solid, not just our word. Documentation, Cole said. Documentation or live witness, Hector said. Someone who can state on record what's in that building and who put them there. Cole thought about the man in the back of the warehouse, the controlled professional voice. The transfer's in 4 days originally, but we're moving it up. Foe's in there, Cole said. Hector looked at him. That voice, Cole said. The one directing the operation. That's the man, Foe. He was not entirely certain of this. It was instinct and inference and the way certain people sound when they're accustomed to being in charge of things that don't get talked about in daylight. But he was certain enough. If Foe's in there, Jimmy said slowly, and we can get him talking, we can't go in there and conduct an interrogation, Hector said. I'm not saying an interrogation. I'm saying if we can create a situation where he's making decisions under pressure, he'll use a phone. He'll call up the chain, and if we can record that. You're not wired, Hector said. I have my phone, Jimmy said. Another silence. The wind moved along the building's east face and brought with it the smell of exhaust and cold metal, and faintly, the smell of a space heater burning at maximum in a cold room, which was a particular smell that was also, in this context, somehow the saddest smell Cole had encountered in years. Cole's phone vibrated. He looked at it. Unknown number. For a half-second he thought, same voice as last night, the man who'd called the lodge. He answered, Cole Ryder. Not a question, a woman's voice, young, low, and fast. I'm Sasha. Priest told me you're outside. Where are you? Cole said. Storage room on the north face, second door from the fire exit, the room with the broken light. She paused. I've been in here for 4 hours. Cole looked at Hector, pointed north. Hector nodded immediately. They know you've been watching, Cole said. I heard them say it. Her voice was steady in the way of someone running on genuine terror that they've decided not to let stop them. I've been here since 5 this morning. I have documentation, photos, dates, license plates, 3 weeks of records. Cole went very still. On your phone? On my phone and backed up to a cloud account. A pause. But I need to get out of this room. If they do a sweep before they load... How many are in there, total? A brief silence. He could hear her breathing, controlled, deliberate. I've counted 6. There were 7 earlier, but one of them left around 8 and hasn't come back. Foe is in the main space. There are 2 of his people near the kids, and 2 at the loading bay and 1 who circulates. Another pause. The circulating one scares me. Why? Because he moves like he's looking for something to find. Cole turned away from Hector and Jimmy and looked at the north face of the building across the frozen ground. One fire exit propped with a work glove. One storage room with a broken light. One 19-year-old girl with 3 weeks of documentation and 6 men between her and the door. Can you get to the fire exit? Cole said. If the circulating one's not in the back half. On my count, Cole said. What's the count? Cole looked at Hector. Hector read his face and looked at Jimmy. Jimmy looked at the building and then looked at the sky and then looked at Hector. Now, Hector said. Moving, Cole said into the phone. He crossed the north face at a run, staying low, covering the distance to the fire exit in 8 seconds. He pulled the door open, fully now, the work glove falling away, and stood to the side and waited. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then the door opened further from inside and Sasha came through it. She was smaller than he'd expected, 19 but narrow-shouldered, with a face that was both younger and older than its age in the way of people who've been handled roughly by circumstances and have compensated by developing a quality of alertness that never fully switches off. She had a phone in one hand and a small backpack on one shoulder. She looked at Cole the way Emma had looked at him outside the diner, the rapid, comprehensive assessment, the quick calculation of threat and trust, and then she looked past him to Hector and Jimmy, who had come around from the east corner. She looked at Hector specifically, at the jacket, at the patches. Iron Shepherds, she said. Yeah, Hector said. Priest said you were real. She said it the way you say something you weren't sure you believed until now. Let's move first, Hector said. They went back around to the south face, away from the loading bay side, and pressed against the wall. Sasha was already opening the Cloud app on her phone, pulling up the folder. Cole watched her hands. Quick, practiced. The hands of someone who'd been careful about this for weeks, making backups, building a record. 3 weeks, she said. License plates on every vehicle, photos of the van, dates and times of every person I saw enter or leave. She looked at Cole. And she hesitated. Say it, Cole said. I have audio. She looked down at the phone. 2 days ago, one of the side doors was open, and I was close enough to record. It's 11 minutes. Foe's voice is on it for most of it. Cole looked at Hector. Hector's face did something that in a lesser man would have been called relief. In Hector, it was more subtle than that. Just a slight easing in the set of his jaw, a millimeter of change in the compression around his eyes. That's enough for your state contact, Jimmy said. Maybe, Hector said. Depends on what's on it. Play it, Cole said. Sasha played 20 seconds of it, low volume, everyone crowded close. It was enough. Foe's voice, the same controlled professional voice Cole had heard through the gap in the plywood, talking about logistics, about a specific dollar amount, about a destination that wasn't named directly, but was referenced in terms that left very little ambiguity about what kind of destination it was. Hector put his hand out for the phone. Sasha looked at him for a half second. Then she gave it to him. Hector forwarded the audio file and the photo file to his contact's number with a text that said, Millhaven Warehouse. Need state investigators. Do not go through county. Children on site. This is real. He handed the phone back to Sasha. How long for your contact to respond? He asked Jimmy. On a day like this? An hour minimum before anyone mobilizes. Then we need to hold this situation for an hour, Hector said, without going in and without spooking them into loading the van early. How? Cole said. We watch the east side. If the loading starts, we have to create a delay. He looked at each of them. Non-violent. We block the vehicle. We create a breakdown. Something that buys us the hour. And Foe in there, Cole said. Talking about tonight, moving tonight. I heard you, Hector said. An hour might be... I know. Hector's voice was flat, final. Not arguing, just acknowledging. Cole looked at the building. At the roll-up door still up 3 feet. At the van. It was Sasha who moved first. She said, wait, and looked at her phone. Then she looked up. The audio, she said. I need you to hear the end of it, not the faux part. She looked at Cole specifically. 40 seconds in from where I stopped. Cole took the phone, found the timestamp, pressed play. The first voice was Foe's, mid-sentence. By the time anyone files a missing persons, the paperwork is already closed. Kessler handles that end. A name. Kessler. And then a second voice, one Cole hadn't heard yet. And the second voice said something that stopped his blood entirely. The second voice said, "What about the writer situation?" And Foe said, "That's being handled. Kessler's already pulled his file. The writer thing goes back further than the girl. There's leverage there. He had a family." A pause. "Had?" The second voice said. "Car accident," Foe said. "Wife and daughter. October 4 years ago. Ryder was investigated, briefly, for negligent circumstances. Nothing came of it, but the file exists. Kessler can make it look like more than it was." A pause. "So if he goes to anyone with the girl, then Ryder is the one who looks like a problem," Foe said. "Not us." The recording ended. Cole held Sasha's phone. His thumb was on the screen where he'd pressed play. He was not looking at anything. He was standing against the corrugated metal wall of the warehouse in the cold December morning with the sound of that voice in his head. He had a family. Had. And the thing that happened in his body was not rage exactly, and not grief exactly, and not fear exactly. It was all three at once, compressed into something that had no name, that simply existed as a physical pressure in his chest and his throat and behind his eyes. They had a file on Diane and Rosie, not just Foe. Kessler, whoever Kessler was, whatever position they held, whatever desk the closure paperwork came across, had gone into the system and pulled the investigation file from 4 years ago. The investigation that had lasted 11 days before it was closed with no findings, because there were no findings, because it had been an accident, because the ice on the October road had nothing to do with Cole Ryder and everything to do with physics and bad luck and the specific cruelty of the universe on an ordinary afternoon. They had that file, and they were prepared to reshape it, to make the man who had pulled a 6-year-old out of a blizzard look, in the eyes of any official who received a call about a concerned adult with a foster child, like someone with a history, like someone the system should be concerned about, like someone who should not be listened to. Cole gave the phone back to Sasha. He turned and looked at the building. Jimmy was watching him. Jimmy's face was doing nothing at all. Hector was watching him. Hector's face was doing the compression thing, everything held inward, waiting. "They have a file on me," Cole said. "I heard," Hector said. "Diane and Rosie." He said their names out loud for the first time in longer than he could immediately calculate. He said them flat, informational, the way Emma stated true things. "From the investigation after the accident, Cole? They're going to use it if I go anywhere near an official channel." He paused. "Which means I can't be the one making contact with investigators. I can't be visible in this at all, or they flip the narrative." "That's not," Jimmy started. "It's tactically true," Cole said. "Not angry, not bitter, just accurate. As soon as my name comes up, the story becomes about me and the girl I took from a placement without authorization, and the file they've manufactured gives them the version of events that makes that look like what it isn't." Silence. "Kessler," Hector said. "Whoever Kessler is." "The county administrator," Jimmy said quietly. "The name on the shell company. The warehouse lease." He paused. "Kessler." The name clicked into place. Cole looked at Jimmy. Jimmy's jaw was set. "Same person," Cole said. "Same person," Jimmy confirmed. "Kessler runs the welfare office. Kessler closes the paperwork. Kessler owns the warehouse through 3 shell layers, and Kessler holds the file on you." He paused. "One person. The whole thing goes through one person." The wind moved down the side of the building. Somewhere around the east face, the sound of the loading bay, a scrape of metal, a voice giving instructions. Movement beginning. "They're starting to load," Cole said. Hector looked at the corner, looked at his phone. No reply yet from the state contact. "How long has it been?" Cole said. 18 minutes, Hector said. "We need 40 more." "We need 35 more," Jimmy said. "Minimum." Cole looked at the building, at the van, at the corrugated metal wall that stood between him and 4 children, one of them shaking with fever, one of them clinging to a picture of a backyard in his head, one of them gone silent in ways that don't come back easily. He thought about the voice on the recording. Flat, professional. The writer thing goes back further than the girl. There's leverage there. They had built a weapon out of the worst thing that had ever happened to him. They had taken Diane and Rosie, the accident, the investigation, the 11 days of hell that had come afterward before the finding of no wrongdoing, and they had filed it away and sharpened it and were now holding it ready, not because they cared about the truth of it, not because they believed Cole was guilty of anything, but because a weapon is a weapon, and men like Kessler collect them. Cole breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth, once. He looked at Hector. "I'm going to go in," he said. Hector's expression did not change. "No. Not to engage. To delay." Cole's voice was very level. "I go in through the fire exit. I move through the back half. I find foe. I don't threaten him. I don't touch him. I make him make a phone call, a call up the chain to tell someone the situation is complicated." Why would he do that? "Because I'm going to tell him we've already sent the documentation to state investigators. Even if they're not mobilizing yet, he doesn't know that. He'll make a call to cover himself, and that call will go to Kessler. And while he's on that call, he's not loading children into a van. And when he finds out you're bluffing? By then, either the investigators are mobilizing or they're not. And if they're not," Cole stopped. "And if they're not," Hector said. "Then we deal with what's in front of us," Cole said. "The way we deal with things." Hector held his gaze. The look between them was long and direct and contained everything that didn't need to be said. "You go in through the fire exit," Hector said finally. "You don't engage his people. You find foe. You talk to him. You come back out." He paused. "If anything changes—" "I know," Cole said. "Jimmy's at the east corner. I'm at the personnel door." "I know." Cole looked at Sasha. She was watching him with those too old, too alert eyes that were Emma's eyes in a different face, at a different age, out the other side of the same system. "Your documentation is solid?" he said. "Solid," she said. "If this goes wrong and we get separated, you go straight to Priest at the bikes. You do not stop, you do not wait for any of us. You go to Priest and you get to Emma and you get out of the county." Sasha held his gaze. "Okay," she said. He looked at Hector one more time. Hector nodded once. Cole went around to the north face. The fire door was still open its 4 inches. He pushed through it, into the dark back half of the warehouse, into the smell of cold concrete and boxed cardboard, and the faint warmth leaking from the front chamber through the gaps in the partition. He moved along the back wall. The gap in the plywood, the place he'd looked through before, was still there. He put his eye to it. The configuration had changed. The 2 men who'd been standing near the loading bay were both outside now, working with the van. The space heater was still running. The 4 children were still in the same positions. The 2 boys together on the left, the girl under the too small blanket, Marcus still standing, still shaking, his arms wrapped around himself, his face turned down. And at the far end of the chamber, near a folding table stacked with manila envelopes and a laptop, standing with a phone in his hand and his back partially toward Cole, a man, compact, maybe 50. Neat, dark jacket, not leather, not biker, the kind of jacket that means business without meaning anything in particular. Hair going gray at the temples. The posture of a man who is used to being the person in the room whose instructions are followed. Cole moved to the gap where the partition didn't meet the north wall, a 4-inch clearance, enough to slide through sideways. He went through it and straightened up on the other side, in the front chamber, and the space heater's warmth hit him immediately. The man at the table heard him. He started to turn. Cole was already across the space, not running, not rushing, just moving with the kind of targeted efficiency that doesn't give anyone time to react. He was between the man and the laptop before the man had fully registered what was happening, and he put his body between the man and the table and looked at him at a distance of 4 feet. The man looked back. His face was composed. More composed than most people's faces would be in this situation, which told Cole something important about who he was dealing with. "Darren Foe," Cole said. A pause. "Your writer," Foe said. The name in this man's mouth from this man's face in this warehouse with 4 children behind him sent something through Cole that he held very still and very flat. "Call Kessler," Cole said. Right now. Tell him the documentation is already with state investigators, and the building needs to be cleared. Fo looked at him. His composure was impressive, and also in the way of composure that is performed rather than natural, slightly wrong in its margins. That's not true, Fo said. Call Kessler, Cole said. Let him decide. A long pause. Fo looked at the children. Looked at them the way you look at inventory, with the specific, absent quality of a man who has restructured his perception of other people into something that requires a certain ongoing effort to maintain. And Cole felt the coldness of that look in his chest, like something structural failing. I have your file, Fo said. The accident, the investigation. I know, Cole said. Then you know how this ends for you if you don't. Call Kessler, Cole said. Tell him about the documentation. Tell him it's already gone. Fo looked at him, reading him. Cole held himself completely level, completely still, in the way he'd learned in years of situations where the read you gave off was the only tool you had. Whatever Fo saw, it was enough to make him uncertain. He reached for his phone. That was when Marcus, the 9-year-old with the fever, the boy who had been standing shaking in the center of the space, that was when Marcus looked up from the floor and saw Cole. And his face did something that Cole would carry with him for a very long time. Not relief exactly, not hope exactly, something more fundamental than either. The expression of a child who has been holding on to something for a very long time with no evidence that it was worth holding on to, and who has just, for the first time, seen a reason to keep holding. Fo was dialing. Cole was watching Fo and watching the roll-up door and watching the children and running calculations in his head about the 6 men in the building and the one who circulated and the fact that in approximately 30 seconds, Fo was going to discover that the documentation had not yet reached state investigators. And in the 30 seconds after that, the situation was going to change in ways Cole could not fully predict. He had the fire exit. He had the north wall. He had Jimmy at the east corner and Hector at the personnel door and Priest back at the bikes with Sasha's 3 weeks of documentation forwarded to a state contact who might or might not be mobilizing. He had 4 children in a cold warehouse and one of them was shaking with fever and one of them believed in a backyard. And Fo had put the phone to his ear and Cole could hear it ringing, 1 ring, 2, and then the sound of someone picking up. And Fo opened his mouth to speak. That was when the personnel door on the south face came off its hinges. Not blown off, not kicked down. Just came open, fast and hard, the way a door opens when someone who has been standing outside it decides that waiting is over. The sound of it rang through the warehouse like a bell, and every head turned, and in the 3 seconds of complete frozen attention that followed, Cole had time to see that it was not Hector who had come through the door. It was a man in a county sheriff's department jacket, and behind him 2 more, and behind them a 4th figure, smaller, in civilian clothes, who should not have been there at all, who Cole had left at the lodge, 40 miles back in the trees, in a room with a cot and a space heater, who was somehow standing in the doorway of a warehouse in Mill Haven at 10:30 in the morning with her worn cloth doll under her arm and her eyes going around the room with that fast, comprehensive assessment that had terrified Cole when he first saw it in a parking lot in a blizzard. Emma. Cole's mind went completely blank for exactly 1 second. Then Fo, whose composure had finally fractured, whose face had broken open into something raw and desperate and completely different from the controlled professional who'd been standing at the table, shoved the phone in his pocket and turned for the loading bay door. And every calculation Cole had been holding together in his head for the last 30 minutes blew apart at once like something structural giving way. And all that was left was the next 3 seconds and the decision that had to be made inside them. Cole moved before the thought was fully formed. Fo was already turning for the loading bay, that compact body pivoting with the practiced speed of a man who has always had an exit strategy. And Cole closed the distance in 3 strides and put himself between Fo and the door. Not a tackle, not a swing, just mass and intention, the specific physics of a bigger man deciding that a smaller man is not going to get where he's going. Fo pulled up short. His eyes went from Cole to the personnel door where the county jackets were pouring in and back to Cole, running the math, finding it didn't add up in his favor. Don't, Cole said. 1 word. Fo looked at him. The composure was gone now. What was underneath it was something smaller and more frantic and more dangerous in the way that cornered things are always more dangerous than things with room to run. Outside, through the roll-up door, there was shouting. The men by the van. Cole heard it unfolding without being able to see it, a voice giving commands, footsteps on frozen gravel, the sound of someone who didn't comply fast enough making contact with the ground. Hector's voice, somewhere in it, low and absolute. One of the men from inside came through the roll-up door fast, heading for the van. Cole saw him in his peripheral, registered the trajectory, registered that Jimmy was at the east corner and Jimmy would handle it, had to handle it, because Cole could not split his attention and still hold foe. He held foe. The children hadn't moved. The two boys were pressed together against the left wall, the older one's arm around the younger. The girl had pulled the blanket over her head in the specific way of a child who has learned that not seeing something is the closest available approximation to not being there. Marcus was still standing in the center of the space. He had stopped shaking, not because the fever had broken, but because something in him had locked into the stillness of a child watching adults fight over his immediate future and understanding, with a precision no 9-year-old should possess, that the outcome of the next 3 minutes was everything. The county men came through the room, past Cole, past the children, one of them stopping near the children and talking to them in a low voice, the specific practiced tone of someone trained to de-escalate small people in frightening situations. One went for the roll-up door, the third came toward Foe. "Darren Foe," the third man said. Foe said nothing. His eyes were still on Cole. "Step away from him," the county man said to Cole. Cole didn't move. "Sir, step away." "I'm stepping away," Cole said, and stepped sideways, not back. Sideways, keeping Foe in the corner of his eye, keeping the roll-up door in the other corner, keeping the children in the center of his vision the way you keep the thing that matters most in the best light you have. The county man reached Foe. Foe looked at him and then did something that Cole did not expect. He started talking. Immediately, fluently, with the ease of a man who has prepared this speech and has been waiting for the right audience. He said Cole's name. He said the word unauthorized. He said the child was removed from placement and we have documentation and I want to speak to Kessler. The county man looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him. There was a pause, a single, suspended second. And in that second, Cole understood that the thing Foe had been planning was happening right now, in this room, with these particular people. That whoever these men in county jackets were, the question of whether they were Kessler's people or clean people had not yet resolved itself. And in that unresolved second, the entire shape of the next hour was being decided. Emma's voice came from the doorway. Not loud, not afraid, just Emma, standing in the personnel doorway with her doll, looking at the county man with those eyes that did not perform innocence or distress or anything that could be manipulated or dismissed, and saying, "He didn't take me. I asked him to stay." The county man looked at her, at Cole, at Foe. Foe said, "She's 6 years old. She doesn't—" "Be quiet," the county man said. To Foe, flat and immediate. Foe went quiet. Outside, the sound of the situation resolving. Not cleanly, not without struggle, but resolving. Cole heard Hector's voice and then a sound that was brief and conclusive and then quiet. He heard Jimmy, low and controlled. "Stay down, stay down." He heard the creak of the van's weight as someone's body met it. He looked at Emma. "How did you—" "Priest brought me," she said. Cole turned. Priest was behind her in the doorway, his big frame filling it, his pale eyes going around the room with that slow, total catalog. He looked at Cole. His face said, "I made a call. She asked to come. I decided." Cole looked at him for 3 seconds. He didn't have the capacity to be angry. Not right now. Not with the county men still undetermined and Foe still talking with his eyes, even if his mouth was shut and Marcus still standing in the center of the room, shaking again now that the locked stillness had released. Cole crossed to Marcus. He crouched down. Marcus looked at him. Brown eyes, fever bright, the face of a boy who had been 9 years old for what felt, in this moment, like a very long time. "Hey," Cole said. Marcus said nothing. "You're Marcus," Cole said. Emma told me your name. Something in Marcus's face shifted, small, specific. Emma got out, he said. His voice was rough, the roughness of someone who has been breathing cold air in a space heater's radius for hours, the roughness of fever. Emma got out, Cole said. Marcus looked at the floor. His jaw moved. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, but his face was fighting it with everything it had, because 9 years old and fighting it was the only mode he'd been operating in for long enough that stopping felt impossible. She said she'd send someone, Marcus said. Barely audible. Cole had to look away for a second, just 1 second, at the wall, at the cold concrete floor, at the space between 2 seconds where the thing that rose in him, not grief, not rage, something more complete than both, could be held without breaking anything. He looked back at Marcus. She did, he said. The county man who'd been talking to Foe was on a radio now, low and fast. Cole heard fragments. 4 children, 1 requires medical, requesting EMS, clean language, procedural language, the language of someone following a protocol that was designed to protect rather than manage. Cole looked at the man. Who called you? He said. The county man looked at him. State investigator's office, he said. We got a packet about 40 minutes ago. Photos, audio, documentation. He paused. We've been aware of concerns about this county's placement structure for 8 months. We've been building a case. Your documentation, he gestured, meaning Sasha's 3 weeks of records, Sasha's audio. That was the piece we needed. Cole looked at Hector, who had come in from the loading bay side, his jacket dark with cold air. Hector was looking at the county man with the specific measured attention of a man assessing whether the information being given to him is accurate. Kessler, Hector said. The county man's expression tightened. Is being detained, he said, carefully. As of this morning, the documentation named a county administrator. State investigators moved on that simultaneously with this location. Simultaneously. Meaning the piece Hector had sent 40 minutes ago had landed in a structure that was already moving, that had been building toward this, and had needed exactly this one piece to pull both threads at once. Foe, who had been standing against the wall with the second county man's attention on him, made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound. The specific exhalation of a man who has just heard the name of the person who was supposed to protect him from exactly this outcome and has understood that the protection is gone. Cole stood up from where he'd been crouching with Marcus. He looked at Foe across the space. Foe looked back at him. She walked 12 miles, Cole said. Quietly. Conversationally. The way you state a fact to a person who needs to understand the full weight of what they've done. 6 years old, in a blizzard. 12 miles rather than spend another night in a house connected to your operation. Foe said nothing. That's your record, Cole said. That's the thing you built. The county man took Foe's arm. Foe went. He didn't struggle. Whatever he'd been, controlled, professional, a man who had spent years managing the gap between what he appeared to be and what he was, whatever that had required him to maintain, he wasn't maintaining it now. He went through the personnel door and out into the cold morning, and Cole watched him go and felt nothing that he would have been able to name cleanly, nothing that fit a single word, just the massive, unsteady weight of a situation resolving in real time. Jimmy came through the loading bay, and behind him came Sasha, and behind Sasha came the gray December morning with all its flat, cold light. Sasha stopped when she saw the children. She looked at the girl with the blanket and the 2 boys against the wall and Marcus in the center of the room. She had been 19 years old in this county's system not so long ago. Cole watched her face go through something, several things, that she processed without speaking, without looking away. Then she crossed to the girl with the blanket and crouched down and said gently, "Hey, I've got you. You're out now." The girl didn't emerge from the blanket immediately, but her hand came out, slow and careful, and found Sasha's hand and held it. Cole looked at Emma, who was standing inside the doorway now. She was looking at Marcus. Marcus was looking at her. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The specific, silent recognition between 2 children who have survived the same thing in adjacent spaces, who have held each other in their minds as evidence that someone else knew what they knew, that communication was complete and wordless and entirely sufficient. Outside, EMS was arriving. Cole heard it. The crunch of tires on frozen gravel, a door, voices. He looked at his hands. They were steady. He hadn't noticed until now that they'd been shaking for the last 20 minutes. Hector came to stand beside him. They stood together for a moment in the warmth of the space heater, in the pale warehouse light, in the strange, suspended stillness of a situation that has been moving at lethal speed and has just, unexpectedly, stopped. "The file," Cole said, "on Diane and Rosie." "They'll have to release it when the case goes through," Hector said. "All the documents Kessler held. It'll come out that it was manufactured leverage. The investigation was clean." Cole was quiet. "It's going to be all right," Hector said. Cole looked at the children, at Marcus, who was walking toward Emma with the careful steps of a child whose legs aren't entirely trustworthy right now, at Emma, who watched him come, and then, when he was close enough, put her hand on his arm the way she'd seen adults do when they meant something by it. At the boy with the backyard in his head, Danny, Cole realized, the younger of the two boys against the left wall, now standing up, now looking around with the dazed expression of someone emerging from something too large to immediately process. At the girl who had stopped talking, Leah, who still had not spoken, who was still holding Sasha's hand inside the too small blanket, but who had, in the last 60 seconds, looked up. Just looked up. It was the smallest possible movement, the most preliminary possible gesture toward the world outside the blanket, but it was there. Cole breathed in. "Yeah," he said. "It is." The EMS team came through the door and the room began moving again, gently, with the organized purpose of people who know what to do next and do not need to be afraid of it. And in the middle of all of it, in the particular warmth of a space heater in a cold warehouse on a December morning, in a county that was going to look very different in the coming weeks, Cole Ryder stood with his shoulder aching and his hands finally steady, and watched 4 children take their first steps into whatever came after the worst thing that had happened to them. And he did not look away, not for a second, because they had earned the right to be witnessed, and witnessing was the least and the most that he could. The weeks after Mill Haven moved the way recovery always moves, not in a straight line, not cleanly, but forward, incrementally. The way a frost-damaged thing grows back from the root rather than the surface. Kessler's arrest held. The case built itself from Sasha's documentation outward, layer by layer, the way corruption always unravels when you find the right thread. Names connecting to names, shell companies dissolving into real people, real desks, real signatures on real paperwork that had real children behind it. Bo cooperated once it became clear that Kessler had no intention of protecting anyone but himself. The county placement network was suspended pending investigation. 11 names, the 11 children already in the system's blind spots, became 11 active searches. By the end of the 3rd week, 9 of them had been located. By the end of the 4th, all 11. Not all of them were okay. That was the truth nobody flinched from, because flinching from it would have been a different kind of abandonment. Not all of them came back from where they'd been intact. Some of them were going to be working on it for years. But they were found. They were known. They had names that the right people were now saying out loud in rooms that were actually trying to help. And that was not everything, but it was not nothing either. Danny got his backyard. Not the mythical one the social worker had used as a lure. That specific house had never existed in the way she'd described it. But a family in the next county, a couple in their 40s who had fostered 4 children over 8 years, and who had, in fact, a backyard with an oak tree and a tire swing, contacted the state placement office after the story broke in the regional news. Danny moved in on a Thursday in late January. He stood in the backyard for 11 minutes the first afternoon, not playing, not running, just standing there in his coat with his hands in his pockets looking at the oak tree. The foster mother told the caseworker about it later. The caseworker, who had been in the job for 14 years and thought she had seen everything, had to step outside to compose herself before writing up the notes. Marcus's fever broke in the hospital 2 days after the warehouse. He was there for 4 days, long enough for his body to remember what warmth and regular food felt like. And then he was discharged into a temporary placement that the state investigators had personally vetted. He asked, on his 3rd day in the hospital, whether the man with the scar was coming back. The nurse didn't know who he meant. He described Cole, the scar, the leather jacket, the specific quality of crouching down to be at eye level. The nurse told the caseworker. The caseworker contacted Hector. Cole went to see Marcus on a Saturday morning. He brought Jimmy because Jimmy had a steadiness that children responded to, and because Cole did not want to do this alone in the particular way that he was learning to name as needing company rather than weakness. Marcus was sitting up in bed when they came in. He looked at Cole for a moment. Then he said, without preamble, "Emma said you'd come." "Emma was right," Cole said. Marcus nodded as though this confirmed something he'd decided to believe and was glad to have confirmed. Then he showed Cole a drawing he'd made, a motorcycle, rendered in red crayon with the specific confident inaccuracy of a child who draws from impression rather than observation, which meant it had 6 wheels and flames coming from the handlebars in a way that was physically impossible and completely correct. Cole took the drawing home and put it on the refrigerator. Leah spoke again in February. Not much. Not all at once. The therapist working with her said it came in increments. A word, then a phrase, then one afternoon, reportedly, an entire sentence about what she wanted for lunch. The therapist said this was not a miraculous recovery, was not a resolution, was the beginning of a long road that Leah would walk at her own pace. But the first word had come. And the first word was, apparently, a name. Not her therapist's name, not her new foster parent's name. Emma's. Sasha moved into an apartment in March, a real one, with her name on the lease. Priest co-signed it without being asked. She started taking courses at the community college, administrative law, which she said with a specific dry humor that made Priest laugh in a way that Cole had not heard from him before, a full, open sound. She visited the lodge twice in the spring. The second time she stayed for dinner and afterwards sat on the porch with Hector while the others cleaned up, and they talked for a long time about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of particular, its own kind of specific. When she left, she hugged Hector briefly, which he received without awkwardness, which for Hector was something. Emma went to live with her Aunt Carla in April. Carla had been found through the state investigation, a connection that should have been made at Emma's initial placement, and hadn't been, whether through negligence or something worse, was still being determined by people whose job it now was to determine it. She was a quiet woman in her late 30s who drove a practical car and kept a small house, and who, when she arrived at the temporary placement to collect Emma, stood in the doorway and looked at her niece for a long moment without speaking, and then simply opened her arms and Emma walked into them with the same deliberate, self-possessed directness she did everything. Cole was there. He'd asked if he could be, and the caseworker had said yes, and Carla had said yes, and Emma had said yes with the particular inflection of a child who has been consulted about her own life and intends to continue requiring this. He stood by the window while Carla and Emma had their reunion, and he watched and did not look away, and did not try to make himself smaller or invisible, because he had learned, was still learning, would be learning for a while yet, that being present for things that mattered was not an imposition but a form of respect. Emma, when she was ready, came over to him. She looked up at him. He crouched down. "You'll visit," she said. "Yes." "Promise?" Cole looked at her, at the worn cloth doll under her arm, at the eyes that had looked at him in a blizzard, and made a calculation and decided, against all available evidence, to trust. "I promise," he said. She studied him for a moment with that thoroughness she brought to everything. Then she nodded, satisfied, and went back to Carla and took her aunt's hand and walked out of the room and into the spring afternoon. Cole drove back to the lodge that evening. The shoulder had improved. Not fully, it wasn't ever going to be fully, but enough that the ride was bearable rather than a sustained argument with his own body. The Softail moved under him with that familiar rhythm, that deep, reliable pulse, and the spring air was cold still, but differently cold, the cold of something that knows its ending rather than the cold of something with nowhere to be. The lodge was lit up when he pulled in. Hector's bike in the drive, Jimmy's car, Priest's bike. The smell of something cooking reaching him before he even killed the engine. He sat for a moment in the driveway after the engine died. The silence after a long ride. The specific quality of arriving somewhere. He went inside. The kitchen table had food on it. Hector had cooked, which he did when something significant had concluded, a habit that nobody acknowledged directly but that everyone understood. Jimmy was already eating. Priest was at the window with coffee. Hector was at the stove with his back turned. Nobody made a ceremony of Cole coming in. Nobody acknowledged the day, the drive, the specific weight of what had just been handed off to something better and more permanent than any of them could provide alone. They just made room at the table. Cole sat down. Hector put a plate in front of him without turning around. Priest refilled his coffee from across the room without being asked. Jimmy slid the bread basket 2 inches closer to Cole's side without comment. Outside, through the lodge window, the pines held their dark shapes against the last light of the spring evening, and somewhere on Route 9, 40 miles south, a woman named Patty was closing up a diner that still smelled like coffee and grease and the particular warmth of a place that stays open for people who have nowhere else to go, and on the wall beside the register, if you looked, you would find a small drawing taped at eye level. A child's crayon house, lopsided, with stick figures standing in front of it, and among them one tall figure in a dark jacket, rendered with the specific confident love of a child who draws not what she sees, but what she knows. Cole ate. The food was warm. The room was quiet in the way of rooms where the people in them have been through something together and do not need to explain it to each other. He was not healed. He knew that. Healing was not the word for what this was. Healing was a longer road than any of them had finished walking, but he was here, at this table, in this room, with these people. And outside, somewhere in a small house with her aunt's hand and her worn cloth doll, and the particular dignity of a child who survived everything they threw at her and never once stopped asking the right questions, Emma was home. That was enough. That was for tonight, entirely enough.